How's it going? In this video, I'm going to be talking about Undernight in-birth system mechanics. If you are new to the game or are merely curious, hopefully you can find this information useful. As a disclaimer, I have played a ton of this game, over 1,000 matches on the console. I have a pretty solid handle on most of the game's mechanics as a result. So let's get right into things, shall we? The first thing I want to touch on is grid, which is the square bar you see on the bottom. It can be influenced in a variety of ways, and I will touch on them as we come across them. There are many things that are integrated into a lot of the other mechanics, so I just want to generally talk about it right now. You can directly influence it by holding D, which, as you can see, charges up the gauge. It also removes your opponents in the same process. Downside is it has diminishing returns, and it also eats away your meter on the bottom. So be careful when you do it. It also has a lot of recovery, and you can be punished very easily for it. Also, there are a variety of things that can occur that can break the grid and render it useless for a limited amount of time. Things that will break it: being hit while shielding, being thrown while shielding, also in the air, being hit by Veil Off, guard canceling without Vorpal State, and using Infinite Worth EXS without Vorpal State. While broken, you cannot use any form of shielding, assault, or guard cancel. So keep that in mind if you have a broken grid. Next up, we're going to talk about movement. Going over movement, we can see that we have a forward, back, down, jump. There's no double jump. We also have command dashes and back dashes. If you push forward or 6 AB, you have a command dash. Do the opposite, you get a back dash, which is kind of handy if you're not very nimble on the pad. You can also do this in the air, at least forward. Gives you assault. On the ground, you can do this by executing 6D or forward D. In the air, you can execute assault the exact same way, forward or 6D. You can also hit 66 like a regular air dash, or you can hit forward A and B. You can do it all three ways, whatever suits your fancy. Now, as effects of movement are not generally all that pronounced in other games, in this game, however, you do get effects. As you can see with the grid gauge building up, if I were to move towards Waldstein, he starts losing it and I gain it. However, if I back away, he gains it and I lose it. So keep that in mind. You're rewarded for being aggressive, but do be responsible like anything. Also, other things that give you meter: assault. Gives you a nice little chunk of assault, or nice little chunk of grid. So it's encouraged to do it whenever possible. It's a great movement option as well. Moving on, we're going to move into attacking. Now, in regards to attacking, I don't want to go through combos and stuff like that. I just want to touch on this real quick in a real basic sense. Attacking your opponent reduces their grid by 1, a flat 1, or down to a minimum of 0. You cannot decrease that further by doing a long combo or anything of that nature. The first hit will just reduce it by 1, and then that's it. As far as reverse beats, like in Melty Blood, you do have such a thing. Generally, you're only able to go ABC in a lot of other games, but in this game, you can go CBA if you want, BCA, whatever you want. Now, generally, you're also not able to use the same attack twice, like 5B. However, the game has Smart Steer, which is an auto combo, So if I start with 5B and then mash A, I can get another 5B in there if I want. Now that can be used however you want. It's pre-programmed and must occur. So you can get around that exception with Smart Steer. And that's available to absolutely everybody. It's a very easy combo to do. Just keep mashing A, and you get an easy combo. It's not a great combo, but it's there. Alright, we're going to go to force function next. Going to go through force function here real fast. Force function is a unique ability to each character. It is executed by pressing B and C together, just like that. And depending on the character, it gives you some ability. Nanase's is a jump. Now that doesn't seem real useful, but I'm sure you creative people out there could find a use for it. You'll also notice that when you use force function, it eats your grid on the bottom. You can see that. You can always use it no matter how much grid you have. However, it will take at least that one brick. It will, however, take up to 99% of the additional grid block if it is not full. So it can take up to 199% of 2 grid blocks, if you want to call it that. So, based on your chosen character, find out what the force function does, find creative uses for it. There are lots of different properties for them. Some of them charge up and gain new properties. Some of them are just extra movement options. There's a lot of uses, there's a lot of variety. Make sure you explore it. Gonna head on over to guarding now. Guarding in this game is very important, actually. Believe it or not, it has a minor effect on grid, as well as keeps your opponent from hitting you. But not everything can be guarded. In the air, you can't guard anything, normally. You can guard on the ground, just normally by holding away, though. Make sure you use the correct zone for the attack. In the air, though, you can guard projectiles. If I can get one to land here. There. You can guard a projectile. Now, there is a shield guard, but that doesn't protect you either in the air. And I'm not going to talk about that just yet. But as far as air-to-air attacks, you also cannot guard those. But you can shield guard them, so that's possible. So, to reiterate, on the ground you can defend everything. In the air, you can only defend against projectiles normally. Unless shielding. And if you're jumping in, even with shielding, if you get hit by a ground normal, it will kick your ass. Alright, next up, we're going to talk about shielding. Who saw that coming? I have a brief addendum to guarding. I forgot to mention that if you are currently in block stun, if your opponent switches sides with you, you do not immediately have to switch your guard direction to continue guarding successfully. So you cannot be mixed up with left to right shenanigans like you can in other games. I can demonstrate that right here, right now. I'm holding left this entire time. Left that entire time. Now I'm holding right. You can see on the button inputs. No problem. Pretty cool, right? One other thing I want to mention is you cannot jump behind your opponent in the corner. So you can't mix them up that way either. So keep these things in mind while playing the game. Moving on now for real. So what is shielding? Shielding is a powerful defensive technique that grants you effects that you don't get with your normal block. It's easy to do, you just hit away and D. It doesn't cover all zones, so you have to adjust accordingly. Now, this is an extremely important thing to learn to use in this game. On the ground, you can use it to quickly gain a ton of grid. Now, it also grants recovery frames, but they're not really that important on the ground because your opponent can still cancel attacks. However, where this is extremely useful is against aerial attacks, and I'll demonstrate that now. I don't know why that's doing that. Anyway, just to demonstrate, Nanasei's JBB hits twice. Okay, so now we'll switch the dummy onto shield. You'll notice I can only do one attack while she is shielding. I cannot cancel that. However, when the shield's down, I am able to do both. Ooh, tough timing. Seriously, come on. There, you can hit both when they're not shielding. But with shield, you can only do the one. Now, why is this important? Well, if your opponent's running a train on you of pressure and they do a jump attack and you shield it, they're locked into that attack until they hit the ground. They also suffer from more recovery frames and are therefore extremely easy to punish. It's basically a free shot to your opponent if you shield them in the air, while they are in the air. This also applies to if you are in the air and shield their attack. Remember earlier, you could only shield aerial attacks with the shield, unless it was a projectile, of course. But if you do that, they are also committed to that attack till they hit the ground and deal with the recovery frames. It is extremely important to learn how to use this technique. One other thing. This bubble shield. You notice how this sucker really eats up your meter really bad? It does have additional pushback. And it doesn't shield the attack you pop it on. How this happens is if you're already in block stun and then hit shield, it pushes your opponent back and then shields the following attack. Which may not be very beneficial because some characters have attacks that close in. But you can still use that to effectively gain a ton of extra grid and push your opponent away. Perhaps they'll miss, and you can punish them that way. It's up to you to use it responsibly, figure it out. Just to keep in mind, if you hold shield normally, it does eat your meter pretty bad, as you can see. You can hold it quite a long time. You can eat your whole bar with it if you want. Not that I recommend doing this, but just for the sake of demonstration. Anyway, moving on. Set up recovery. One more thing about shield before we move on. If you shield the wrong zone and are hit, you will have your grid broken. I'll demonstrate that here. Notice the grid is now cracked and smashed. you can no longer generate positive grid. You can, however, still lose it, and this penalty lasts until that little gray bar beside the grid goes all the way down to 0. You also cannot use Assault until that recovers. 60 does nothing, forward AB, 66, nothing. You can't use it. So when your grid's broken, you are at a pretty substantial handicap. So keep that in mind and shield responsibly. It does have a little bit of a recovery to it. So you can't just throw it out willy-nilly. You gotta be pretty responsible. Alright, now we can move on. Recovery is pretty straightforward. There's not a lot to say about it. However, there are some things that are worth noting. And I will demonstrate them here. In the air, if you get hit, you can recover in the air 3 different directions. Away, forward, and neutral. Now, this isn't a big deal. Keep in mind that if you recover in the air, you are invincible until you hit the ground, but you cannot take any actions. So your opponent cannot reset you, but you can also not punish their reset attempt. So keep that in mind. However, if you recover on the ground, you can recover neutral, or you can recover away. There is one caveat to this, though. If you notice, recovering neutral, nothing. You recover away, though, you lose grid. Just straight up, you lose grid. So not only do you get hit and lose that block of grid that we talked about earlier, you lose another one for backdashing or rolling away. That's very important because the game wants you to try and stay as aggressive as possible. But if you really need the space, don't feel discouraged from using it. It's there for a reason, and better use it than die, I suppose. Keep in mind, there is also emergency guard, which you can use on the ground, and you can also use it on a wall slam. It works there as well. And that means if you recover just at the moment of impact, you are able to recover in a neutral state. That's all that means. Anyway, we're going to move from here into throws. There's not a whole lot to say about throws. They're pretty basic. You notice it gives no grid. However, your opponent has grid. It takes a nice chunk of theirs if you throw them. Now, if you want to try and throw your opponent in hit stun, there are conditions. If you start with a B or a C attack, you see it just reverse beats. You cannot throw during that. However, if you start with a weak attack, an A button, you absolutely can. But it gives that big gold halo, and your opponent knows that they are being thrown and has a longer window to tech. Now, there is a way around this. If you jump in with a heavier attack, your landing recovery will cancel out that restriction, and you'll be able to throw your opponent while they're still in hit stun. So, knowing this, you can utilize it for some advanced level mix-ups if you want, or if you want just to be a jerk, you absolutely can do it. Now, keep in mind that if your opponent techs your throw or breaks your grab, they are at a pretty big advantage. Notice how much grid I get for breaking the throw. The opponent loses about an equivalent amount. So be very careful about that. Also, if your throw attempt gets broken, you get placed at about 8 frames disadvantage. So you can be straight up punished or put on the defensive. So be very careful about that. One other thing I want to touch on is if you are shielding and get thrown, it absolutely breaks your grid. See, the opponent can no longer do shielding. Alright. This also matters in the air. Now, you won't be thrown in the air very often. There are, in fact, only 2 characters who can do that, and that is why I'm showing you with Eltonum here. She absolutely can throw you in the air, and she will smash your grid for it. So be real careful about that. Other than that, you don't have to worry so much about it in the air, but against Eltonum and Akatsuki, just be very conscious of that. Alright, let's move on to Vorpal State, which is a major mechanic and has a lot going on. Vorpal State, as I said, is a major mechanic in the game. You may have been wondering what this circle that fills up on the bottom of the screen in the grid gauge. Well, what is that? Well, as you can see here in just a moment, once that sucker fills all the way up, whoever has the most grid in the tug of war will get this blue aura you'll see around Nanase right now. That is called Vorpal State. Now, what that provides your character is quite powerful, actually. It gives you a little bit of flexibility as well as a flat damage buff. Now, you'll notice 190, that is how much damage 5A does. Once we reach the Vorpal State, boom. You notice it does 19 more damage. It's a flat 10% damage bonus to all hits. That is awesome. It's got more use than just damage, though. As I said, it gives you a little bit of flexibility. It gives you this thing here called Chain Shift, whereas you hit DD, you consume the Vorpal State, and it gives you a rapid cancel type effect. However, you lose the damage bonus for that, so it's got a negative, but if you're trying to do some crazy mix-up or get out of something and Dragon Punch or whatever, you can do that if you have Vorpal State. Now, other things I want to note. I'll go ahead and leave Vorpal State on for the moment. So, okay, I have no meter. Now let's build up the grid as much as I can. Granted, I don't have any meter, but it still allows me to charge up the grid. Okay. Well, now I got Vorpal State. I already had it, but just for the sake of argument, let's pretend I just got Vorpal State. Oh, I have no meter, though. What can I do with this? Well, I get the damage bonus. But if I Chain Shift, I convert all of those squares directly into meter at a fixed rate. Now, I don't know exactly what the conversion rate is. You can find it online somewhere. I'm not going to figure it out. I don't really care that much. I just know that squares of grid give me meter at a fixed rate. Now, another thing to keep in mind, that while it is unfortunate that you have to consume the Vorpal State and lose the damage bonus for meter, there is a saving grace to it. You'll see there's a little bar right in the same place as the broken grid area. That same area is a purple bar. Now what happens when we have that bar is that is when the meter or the grid is being converted into meter. And the longer that goes, the longer we retain the damage buff. Now notice we have the damage buff still. Now I'll consume Vorpal State with Chain Shift, and I still have that until it is gone. So you get that effect a little while longer after you Chain Shift. That's a pretty major benefit. You can use it in combos to get the maximum damage near the end if you have to Chain Shift for whatever reason. So it's very important that you remember that and take full advantage of it. And Vorpal State is consumed during all of these following events: Chain Shift, Guard Cancel, Grid Breaking, and using Infinite Worth EXS. Now I've already showed you Chain Shift. Obviously that consumes Vorpal State. So, nothing to see there. That's basically all there is to consider with Vorpal State, I suppose. Very, very powerful mechanic, very useful, allows for a ton of flexibility. Oh yeah, there is another thing. Let's turn this on to player Vorpal. Now, a lot of things you can Chain Shift and cancel. Now, this isn't true for everything, though. If your opponent is blocking, and you use an invincible reversal or sometimes a super, you cannot Chain Shift out of some of these things. Now that's not to say everything, but if you use stuff as a reversal and are hoping to Chain Shift out of it if your opponent blocks it, just assume you're going to be committed for the duration. So if you use a DP and it's blocked and you're like, oh, I'll just cancel that to cover my butt, that's not going to work. And your opponent will kick your ass for it. So be very, very aware of that limitation of it. It is not a cure-all. There is a degree of commitment to the game, and you should respect it and know when it comes up. Alright, now we'll move on to Guard Cancel. Okay, Guard Canceling is exactly what you think it is. It's the same as a Counter Assault or Dead Angle or whatever other game you play. It's a defensive mechanic where if you're in block stun, you can throw your opponent off of you with a counter attack. So, let's see it in action. Now, normally, I have Vorpal State. And doing that eats Vorpal State. However, if I don't have Vorpal State, it is an extremely costly mechanic. Look at that. It smashed my grid and ate 200% of my meter. If you don't have Vorpal State, Guard Cancel is absolutely brutal. Use it responsibly. Last ditch effort. It is a painful transaction to have to pay all of that. You can't Guard Cancel again after your grid's broken. So you either need over 100 meter or Vorpal State and a functioning grid. Or rather, you need Vorpal State or at least 100 meter and a functioning grid. Ah, yeah, I can't do it. Alright. Pretty heavy price. Just keep that in mind when you're going for that. It hurts a lot. if you have to pay the major penalty. If you don't have a lot of meter though, and your grid's low, and you don't have Vorpal State anyway, you know, whatever. You're probably not losing a whole lot, so... There are situations where it might not be that bad of an idea, but paying 200 meter potentially is just awful to consider. Alright. Moving on, we're going to go to the last thing on my list here, and that is meter. Last, but by no means least, we have meter. As you can see on the bottom, the gauge fills up to 200%. EX attacks take 100%. Infinite Worth attacks take 200%. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important to know how to use your meter properly, that's for sure, or how to manage it. But mainly, the mechanic here you want to see is Veil Off. And this, you can use over 100 meter. It slowly burns away your entire meter bar. Benefits of this, though, you can do up to 300% worth of meter attacks in regular EX attacks, or you can do 400% worth. To use that, get an infinite worth attack in there. However, keep in mind that if you use an infinite worth attack, it will consume the entire bar regardless. Okay. Well, what else is going on here? Well, Veil Off actually functions as this game's burst. It wall slams the opponent, and as you can see, it smashes their grid if they get hit by it. So you're at a pretty major advantage if you manage to hit your opponent with it. It gets them off of you, and it breaks their grid so they can't close in on you quite as easily. Now, there are other benefits here. As you can see, 190 damage. We're back to this. Okay? Get Vorpal State here. Okay. Now we have plus 19 damage. Well, let's put on Veil Off, and you'll notice now we're doing 247 damage. That adds another 20% damage on top of the 10% damage that we already had. So you get plus 30% additive damage to all of your attacks. And throws. Keep in mind these damage bonuses do apply to throws as well. Something I forgot to mention earlier. But now you know. Now, this is all fine and dandy. One other thing to note about the Veil Off. You can hold it and charge it up. I don't really know of any reason to do that, because that just gives your opponent more time to block it. Because they can block it, and they will. Also, another thing, this thing has a pretty big hitbox on it. At least vertically. It's pretty decent horizontally. It's not great, but what do you do? But if your opponent's jumping, you can pretty much always catch him with it. There is another effect here, though. However, if we drop our HP too low, we get access to Infinite Worth EXS. And it uses the exact same input as Veil Off. Now this has a humongous hitbox on it. It can be blocked, though. It's not perfect. It's a last-ditch effort kind of thing. You can also combo into these things, just like that. You'll notice, though, I don't have Vorpal State. And if I use Infinite Worth EXS, it smashes my grid, which really sucks. However, if I give myself Vorpal State and use it, it takes the Vorpal State and does not break my grid. now you can see the Vorpal State is consumed. My grid is intact. I'm still actually building grid as this entire tech goes on. Very, very cool. Now, of course, these all depend on what character you're playing, and the effects vary. So, you know, just figure out what you have and what you like, and figure out how to do it. Other than that, I think we've covered pretty much all the major mechanics in the game. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this information has been useful to you. If you would like a text version of all of this information, I will provide a link to the article I will publish on my blog, and you can access it there. Thank you very much again. Peace.